Look, the DS, much like the Game Boy line before it, has got itself an endless amount of licensed games. We can be here all day talking about Bob the Builder, Festival of Blood, or Grey's Anatomy, or iCarly 2. I don't find any DS game's existence truly that absurd. Like, yeah, of course there was a Cory in the House DS game, why wouldn't there be? Same way they made Jonas or Sonny with the Chance so random. Freeze! It's weirder to me when a kid's show or movie doesn't have one. Like, what do you mean, dude, what would happen if we had a DS game doesn't exist? First up, I had to venture to good old Big Mike's Homie Shop, a glorious refuge filled to the brim with homies. Remember homies? They were those cool little 50-cent figures that every Karen thought was some sort of gangster initiation device. Like, all you had to do was put a quarter in, you get a whole starter kit of drugs and weapons. I would try to get these anytime I popped into a food city. Each little homie was just teeming with personality. It was a fun little collectible craze, mostly because it didn't try to pander to kids or be the next, Pokemon or whatever. It just trusted us to want to collect these little Mexican dudes. You know, with such a wide gallery of different characters, it only made sense that we eventually got a homies game. Homie Rollers! Thing is, this one released in 2008, years after the initial homies craze in the early 2000s. Maybe this could be a way to really usher the franchise into new territory, particularly the realm of kart racing video games.
Nintendo gets the picture too. Last month they rolled out a new video game called Homie Rollers, so these characters are now kart racing.
Look, it's easy to take for granted the attention to detail and care that's taken into crafting the controls of Mario Kart. It's such an easy game to pick up and play, you almost never need to think about it. The subtle design choices that make these games function so perfectly. It's like second nature. Homie Rollers, though, operates on its own laws of physics. It feels like you're playing like a student project or a cheap in-browser racing game over dial-up. For one, the camera is so rigidly tied to each degree of turn you make, it's almost nauseating to look at. There's hardly any sound effects aside from the music, and the characters themselves feel like more rigid than the actual figures they're based on. It's this really nasty, off-putting experience. Gameplay-wise, you have a few neat mechanics, like you build up your boost not just by drifting, but also by bouncing your lowrider like it's Saturday at the swap meet. There's almost no reason to drift because the controls are so gross and it barely fills up this meter anyway. Your best bet is to just bounce those hydraulics. You know, if the physics and the controls weren't so vomit-inducing, like at bare minimum it didn't make me feel sick to play, I think this would have been a solid obscure DS kart racer, simply on the basis that some of these courses are actually pretty creative and fun. Clearly someone cared here. Like, the Haunted Mansion track is one of the best looking courses in the game, but actually playing through it is fittingly a nightmare. You do have your small cast of homies in here, competing in like a Twisted Metal type tournament where if they win, they get to grant their one wish. And yes, you do have your wheelchair user homie who races in a turbo chair and you can trick it out and do all these mad stunts. Well, there you have it. It's a masterpiece. Nacho! Yeah, of course there was a Nacho Libre DS game. No, that tracks. But instead of just being a little goofy wrestling game, this one gets a little ambitious and really does manage to capture that offbeat vibe of the movie. You have this sort of gross Angela Anaconda art style, much like the Napoleon Dynamite game, to the point where I could have sworn these games would have had the same developers behind it, but no. Given that these two movies do have the same director, it fits perfectly for both. Of course, it does lead to some real nightmare fuel, but hey, what are you gonna do, not play Nacho Libre on the DS? I don't think so.
Look alive. Go now.
So that sister and I may talk of holy things.
You start off with this really chill overworld with this laid-back music, and it just has this nice vibe to it. Like, I find it oddly compelling. And you pretty much walk your way over to just about every scene in the movie. They don't miss a beat here. Sometimes you just walk to a location for the sole purpose of watching a part from the movie play out in this eerie-ass style, and honestly, I gotta respect it. Not only that, you get a ton of FMVs of actual scenes from the movie. This kind of blew me away. It's something you rarely ever see in a DS game to this extent, let alone a licensed one. Of course, wrestling is a big bulk of the game here, and with everybody looking like they're made out of paper, they go over the top with it. You're ripping off entire limbs, just butt-bouncing wrestlers into 1,000 pieces. Jack Black is unafraid to just kick a bitch in the goddamn. It's fun enough, but honestly, it does get repetitive. I was wondering why in the first level I was getting absolutely obliterated as Kid Nacho Libre, and it's because there's very much only one viable strategy here. every single time, and it's literally just be the first one to grab your opponent and then do a finisher. Doing anything else is pretty much useless. Between matches, though, are a ton of different quirked up touchscreen mini games. These are pretty fun. Things like this foot race one where you gotta alternate tapping Jack Black's feet, you're swatting bees, you're scaling the cliffside for some eagle eggs. The one you'll be doing the most is the canyon jumping one where you gotta dodge all these cows carrying copies of Barnyard sloppy toppy games. Now I watched a shit ton of Back at the Barnyard. Like, I think I've seen nearly every episode as it aired. Do I remember a single one? Nope. But thankfully we do have this DS game where we get to create our own cow soda and hang out with all of our favorite slop pals with our fat udders out. It's another mini game collection, but like each mini game is tied to you interacting with a different character, which would be fine. I mean, you get the Barnyard hub world to walk around in, probably the most immersive Barnyard sim of our time. But all these characters send you on a pointless fetch quest first to start said mini game, and it's not like an actual like side mission or anything. No, it's literally like you just walk over here on the map and get 3 of said item. It's literally just like kids game busy work, because otherwise this game would be 20 minutes long. And you know what? It'd be a very good 20 minutes because the mini games here are really fun. You have the stunt racer one where you gotta do midair milk flips, and it's actually so satisfying to land these. Cowapult mini game, classic. Whack-a-mole, classic. You have air hockey with pig. What a dream come true. Oh, and then there's these driving mini games where the graphics just like suddenly get really, really good all of a sudden. Like nothing else in this game looks as high poly and detailed as you trying to drive this truck without you spilling any of your precious melons. Look at this. That's really all there is to it. You just have a really short but sweet collection of Barnyard mini games. And like, what an accomplishment. As far as endless trash slop DS licensed games go, Sloppy Top Games ends up being a needle in the haystack. But like, Barnyard was a decently popular show. You know what wasn't? Pet Alien, another 3D animated series, except nobody watched this one. I remember. I would ask every kid in my class if they watched this show, and nobody ever knew what I was talking about, except one girl. And it was like her and I trauma bonded over just being aware of the mere existence of Pet Alien. It was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but the Pet Alien. A show that was on the air for a solid 5 minutes before getting canceled, and inexplicably getting a DS game 2 years later. How? I've not rewatched Pet Alien once in the last 20 years, so seeing these characters again is like tickling a single dusty, half-eaten brain cell, and I just have to go with it. Like, oh, yeah, I get to play as Swanky? I definitely remember Swanky. And each of their 3D models are impressively accurate to the design in this show. Maybe not the highest bar, but hey, I think for a property this obscure, they could have just used PNGs, and I don't think any kid would be around to really make us think about it. Each level is a different type of like maze puzzle where you gotta sneak around enemies and occasionally make them kill themselves while you collect all these green gems to unlock the exit. It's honestly not half bad, especially for a handheld game. You'd probably play only a few levels at a time. They're simple, but surprisingly pretty creative for what's a licensed game for a disgustingly obscure kids show released 2 years after it flopped. I'm really curious to how this even got greenlit. Like, what was the motivation behind this? Apparently Pet Alien, after getting canned from Cartoon Network, ran on a channel called Animania HD, an exclusive high-definition satellite cable station that nobody had because it launched in 2003, when you were supposed to be watching Pet Alien on your glorious CRT shitbox. Why do I own this? Whoever got me to buy this truly pulled off the scam of the century, another Cartoon Network DS game starring those good old Ed boys. Yeah, okay, this one is nowhere near out of the ordinary relative to Pet Alien, but if you were a huge Ed and Eddy fan like I was, there was a sort of anxiety building in the latter half of the 2000s about just when the show would finally kick the bucket. We never knew if new episodes of Ed and Eddy were on the way or if they'd been abruptly canceled. It was a real emotional roller coaster if you were an Ed head. Cartoon Network would just sort of trickle out these different episodes. Just like my father, Ed and Eddy would leave for months at a time without a peep. I remember when that Invasion special aired, it felt like a major shock to see Ed and Eddy manage to pull through and stand alongside an entire new era of Cartoon Network shows. And as a pleasant surprise, around that same time in 2007, we got Scam of the Century. Given how it felt like the show was on its last legs, I don't think anyone expected this one. I feel like fewer were even aware of it. Leading to this one getting pretty pricey. Who's scamming who, huh? Just think of all the succulent jawbreakers you can buy with all that. This one is a 2D platformer, and it's not bad. You play as all 3 Ed boys with moves that feel true to their characters. Ed just whacks things with his head. Eddy is a sociopath just spitting wads of gum on poor little birds before stomping them out. And the animations here stay true to the show, right down to that accurate running cycle. Graphically, you have these 3D models with a 2D head, and honestly, it looks fantastic. Translating these characters into full 3D has proven to be a nightmare in the past, so this was a pretty clever workaround. This is probably as good as it gets. The platforming here also has these moments where it can feel really slick, between your fast sprint and bouncing on enemies giving you lots of air. You have these random, nuts that you can throw and then hitch a ride on to send you flying. Each Ed boy builds up an invincibility meter that once you activate, they'll all just start to crash out in their own way. It plays pretty smooth. The main thing holding it back is the level design. It just feels way too all over the place. Every stage is pretty large, and a single level can go on for a good 20 minutes. Especially with all the backtracking, repeating different sections. There's a ton of screen crunch sort of going on. Parts like this one where Double D has to hop over all these bottomless pits and these crows off screen can knock you back while you have no clue where your jump is gonna land. You can use the left shoulder button to pause and shift your perspective, but it only goes so far, and it gives what could have been a fast-paced platformer this really tedious stop-and-go rhythm. I feel like this is a situation where we were so close to getting a licensed game that truly could have been pretty damn good. They ended up getting held back by trying to pad out the length. Still, I'm glad the Ed boys managed to squeeze out one last game of their own in their twilight years. Okay, time for something real wacky. You want a real Looney DS licensed game? How about Looney Tunes Cartoon Conductor? This is an entire touchscreen rhythm game where you play through an orchestra of iconic Looney Tunes moments. It's as simple as it sounds. You tap the right notes on the touchscreen while the scene plays out above. Likely meant to be a riff on something like, like Elite Beat Agents. For these sequences, you drag the stylus to each note, to kind of give you the feel of being a loony conductor. It's a pretty interesting approach to this style. Even limited to the DS's graphics, they still managed to make these character models just expressive enough to capture their essence, which is no small feat when you're erotically rubbing Elmer Fudd's soft little baby head.
What did you expect from an opera? A happy ending?
Okay, next up is Shorts! That's right, based on the hit 2009 kids movie Shorts. Can you believe it? I still can't, and I vividly remember this one dropping. His style is pretty hit or miss, but you gotta admire Robert Rodriguez for dropping movies like Sin City between Spy Kids 3D Game Over and Shark Boy and Lava Girl. Shorts was like the inverse of that, being sandwiched between Planet Terror and Machete, and being nowhere near as successful as the other Robert Rodriguez kids films. But somehow Shorts also got a DS game. Ew. But this one ends up being another basic platformer with the meanest little shit narrator for the tutorial. I am being cyberbullied on 2 screens.
Just jump, you dummy. Press the B button. It's called a door. You need to open it. Press up on the control pad in front of it.
The gameplay's pretty basic. You jump around hopping on these annoying little booger monsters. You get a gun to make plants grow. Great. One kind of neat mechanic is getting to use the stylus to draw little platforms for certain sections, which can also help shield you from taking damage. Don't get too excited though, that's about as interesting as it gets. Good God, do these levels go on and on though. I could barely stomach it. It gets brutally repetitive. Good luck finding other Shorts on DS survivors out there though. This game has been an SEO nightmare for the last 15 years. Not too long after Shorts came a little movie called James Cameron's Avatar. Not quite as successful at the box office, but it did manage to fare well enough to usher in a huge craze of CGI vomit hellscapes in 3D. Like, there was nothing to watch in theaters those first few months of 2010. Avatar practically had no competition unless, you're really banking on Spy Next Door and Tooth Fairy. But eventually came the first big blockbuster of the year, Tim Burton's nasty take on Alice in Wonderland. A pretty predictable take on Burton's typical style, squanched out to keep Hot Topic shelves well stocked for years to come. And with that, we got a DS game as a palate cleanser, done in a completely unique style to the movie. Now they could easily just try to go for that more realistic take, which is, what they did with the Wii version. But instead you have this really eye-catching cel-shaded art style with thick outlines, environments, and character designs that kind of feel like something you might see from the sketchbook of Tim Burton. It still feels hot topic-y, but more like on the Invader Zim end of the spectrum. This is a very stylus-heavy game. You start off as the White Rabbit leading Alice through the depths of Wonderland, using the touchscreen for movement and bashing and slashing enemies, helping her across gaps. You have these time manipulation powers that come into play, like reversing time to reconstruct a broken bridge, or cute little moments like this where you make this little worm eat through a mushroom faster. That's just adorable. This is such a gorgeous game, and it just oozes this nice sense of style that's way above and beyond what you'd ever expect for a movie time game on the DS. Eventually more characters join your party, all with different abilities that mix together in some pretty fun ways, like manipulating gravity, phasing objects out of existence. I like how the caterpillar stretches and makes a little bridge for Alice. What a little gentleman. There's also some other neat gimmicks like blowing into the mic to blow down cards, which includes when they're used as windmills or little teacup boats, even mid-combat after you expose a knight's armor. I thought that was a pretty cool addition. Like, usually these sort of feature-heavy DS games can get pretty exhausting, but all the little gimmicks here are implemented so well. Another really creative mechanic is your world map is made of little puzzle pieces you collect, which you can later switch around to bridge shortcuts between areas so you don't have to backtrack through the entire world. That's such an out-of-pocket idea that really complements the feel of journeying through this twisted magical realm where anything goes. Having to escort Alice in certain areas can get tedious, but for the most part, this one surprisingly sits on the end of the licensed game spectrum as one of those rare titles that's not only good, but probably leagues better than the film it's based on. Oh, and if this wasn't already a bit of a peculiar relic, you'll be picking up collectibles for D-Gamer. This was Disney's little Nintendo DS social network bundled into a ton of their tie-in releases. Before it went defunct, this is where you can make a little avatar and chat with other Disney adults about how badly you want Sky High on VHS. A small, painful reminder worth bearing for a really solid and weird DS game.
Thank you.